Okay, welcome to the 58th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I am speaking to Peter Eugène Bennett. Peter is a men's coach who also works with the Sons of Zion and the Sacred Sons. He has an anthropology degree. He is trained in Vipassana Meditation, Wim Hof, Nutritional Therapy, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Qigong, Tantra, and is currently training as a mentor and coach. His work now is focused on helping men reach their potential, creating healthy community spaces of brotherhood so they can be of service to the world and each other. Welcome, Peter.
Ooh, thank you, brother.
Well, thank you. I love to kind of segue how I heard about you or either met you. And obviously a big thanks to Michael Maisie for putting us in touch.
You got Michael Maisie.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So how I love to begin the podcast is for you to share a little bit of your journey. How did you get into the work you now do? And it can be as long or as short.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a big one. I tend to start by my name, Peter. Was gifted me by my father, Malcolm, who had three best friends growing up, all with the same name, Peter. And Peter means rock. It's the foundation in which the church was built. And I've realized over time that that was my first men's circle. It's the first time I was ever in brotherhood before I was born. And it's very much my path, my dharma in life to work with men around, just connection. And so, the more I got onto, this path, learning through the Mankind Project, for example, where I did my first ever men's circle like 6 years ago, as a result of being quite depressed, actually, and just lost, unsure of who I was, insecure, trying to find some meaning out there in the world. The men's circle, the format around like an hour, 2 hours every fortnight, really helped kind of give me the space to express what was alive, what was present for me at the time. They then offered a training course in facilitating councils, which I jumped at the chance to do. And as a result, realized that I was really well suited to being in that field. I'm an active listener. I'm interested. I ask questions that go deep, that penetrate people's psyche. And as a result, I was like, I could quite easily start doing this. And lockdown happened in the UK as well, in London. So I realized there was a space to do like what I called a mental health check-in on Zoom every fortnight. So that went from strength to strength. And then eventually, once lockdown was closed, we ended up doing in-person meetings. And that was really beneficial, bringing all my different training to the foreground. So breath work, doing some guided meditations as well, getting men speaking about their emotions, activating their physicality with some movement, some shaking, some Qigong, and eventually closing with like intentions and what we're carrying forward and what blessings we're going to share with the world. So I was really quite well suited to like archetypes and mythopoetic with my work with Mankind Project. And as a result, I started to look elsewhere for skills that I could apply. And Sacred Sons came into my field. And so March of last year, I went to my first ever in-person training in San Diego, the home of this movement, and went out to the desert, Jacumba, spent 4 to 5 days just like really deep in the work. A lot of embodiment practices I hadn't yet taken on board myself, things like Kriyas that my brother Andrew shared, and then a bunch of just different functional patterns, biomechanics, like really dropping into the body in a good primal way. And just loved it. Took it all on board, did their online training whilst I was in America. So I was traveling with Sacred Sons for 3 months to Maui in Hawaii, then went to Colorado, spent some time with my accountability buddy, which we get paired up with during my first training. And he works on a farm in Colorado, not too far from Boulder. So I got a chance to work with the soil and really start to integrate a lot of these teachings that come through with Sacred Sons, a lot about remembrance, what they call our ancient future, honoring the ancestors, the work that they did for us to be here today. And a lot of that is to do with my relationship to planet Earth, to Pachamama, Gaia. And really loved doing that. And then that sort of like spurred a lot of my journey, and went from Colorado to Utah on a bit of a road trip down to Arizona, then flew to Oregon, was Wolfpack, like support team for an event in Oregon in the forests, became initiated to hold space around the fire, which was really important to me, working with that element. There's lots of fire in my birth chart. And just realized that this was very much my place in the world, and took it back after that to San Diego for my final event, which was the leadership summit. So I got a chance to meet a bunch of the other leaders, people who've been through the training as well. And I was gifted the opportunity to bring it through to Europe. So I did my first ever in-person like leadership event, where I was one of the team bringing through like facilitations here in London in August. Then in December, we did a big EMX, an embodied masculine experience in Devon, where I got a chance to meet Michael Maisie for the first time. And that's where our relationship started. And then since then, I've just been bringing through immersions in Europe this whole past month, been on tour, London to Lisbon to Ibiza to Frankfurt, and this past weekend I've had some time off, some well-earned R&R. So in a nutshell, that's kind of it. It's very much in my path, in my dharma, to be a men's work coach.
Thank you. Yeah, I was listening to your interview with the other podcast online. I've forgotten the name of the chap.
David Bailey.
David Bailey. And he mentioned some of your background before. So you were based in London, but in media. Is that correct?
Yeah. So after I left uni, I got involved in branding, advertising, that type of thing, just as a intern, and then started to get positions as a junior producer, and eventually wound up working in TV. Started as a producer for a current affairs show, became a presenter as well, which is one of my passions. To be in front of a camera, a bit like now. I like the sound of my own voice. And so just, learned a lot actually about communication and self-worth, actually, my own self-esteem, my value, how I'm received, particularly by like a corporate entity, and having to be assertive around my salary and bonuses, and being witnessed, being seen and acknowledged. And eventually I realized that media was the world for me in that guise, was calling or seeking more connection, more consciousness. And so as a result, decided to take on a more of a like freelance role, and just discovered kind of what my medicine was.
Thank you. Amazing. Yeah, great. So I guess where I'd love to segue into is about men's work. You've mentioned Sacred Sons, Mankind Project. What are these things? What's the importance of men's work in your opinion?
I would say that in this day and age, the modern world is quite a confusing place for men. Particularly with the whole dominator culture, the patriarchy, men kind of feeling maybe a little bit uncertain of their own role, their own position, their own power, actually. And so I realized even before lockdown and the pandemic, that there was like this kind of trait in myself of the immature masculine, feeling like I never fully matured into an adult, didn't really have a rite of passage in the traditional sense. I mean, I went to university, I had jobs and things like that. I was paying bills, but I didn't feel like I'd ever really fully crossed over the threshold into manhood. And so these outfits, these brotherhoods like Sacred Sons, Sons of Zion, are there to kind of initiate men into what it means to be the mature masculine, a healthy masculine, a man who provides, protects, supports, uplifts, who's there for other brothers, sisters, children, things of that nature. So in this day and age, I think it's really important for men to go down this road, to discover themselves and to realize kind of what their responsibilities are in this time. So that was kind of it. That's how I felt that it's shown up in my life and many other men that I work with.
Thank you. So if someone's interested in men's work, and what's the type of things that we do? Obviously, I know what we do. I'm interested,
Yeah.
What's the type of thing that, why should someone do it?
Yeah. Well, for me, men's work at this stage in my life is about embodiment. There's quite a well-known, well-used phrase that the longest journey is from the head to the heart.
Mm.
And many men, myself included, have been in my head, have been in my own way, whether that's my ego, the arrogance or the insecurity, right? Like sometimes feeling that I'm misunderstood, or that I'm kind of getting in my own way, that I'm so analytical. My monkey mind is constantly, just processing, analyzing, compartmentalizing, that when I finally learned how to drop into my body and just be in the moment, be present, I found that a lot of the stresses, the depression, the insecurities just melted away. And I just felt what it was like to be, just here and able to like honor the emotions and the messages, my intuition that was coming through. So I think that can be really beneficial. And I know for many men who I've worked with find that huge because, like I say, so many of us are trapped in these four walls.
Thank you. Thank you. So if there's someone who comes to you who who is locked in the four walls, what is the process of us as men becoming more embodied, Peter?
Well, just like before we turned on the camera, we dropped in with a few breaths. Like it's as simple as that, just taking some time to regulate our nervous system. Many men, myself included, have like responsibilities, have to pay bills, have to constantly be on, speeding, rushing through life. And I find it's taking some time to settle into the body, whether that's just like rolling the shoulders or the neck and just feeling through breath what's alive, what's present, then like a check-in like we've done. And I do with pretty much every person I speak on the phone with now. It's just like, what's present? How are you feeling? Like, what's going on? How can I be of support? And I think that's a really easy way, a gateway into embodiment, is just to be present. And how that looks for you, it depends on the person. Some people respond more to breath work. Some people respond more to like physical activation. I know with like Sacred Sons and Sons of Zion, we do ritual combat. So getting in the boxing ring or wrestling, that type of thing. But also like the more like, I guess emotionally intelligent, like how to express our emotions, how to be in the heart. And one thing I learned through a sister and also a book called The Language of Emotions is that all emotions are guides, they're friends, they're here to support us, even if they feel heavy, even if they're negative and they're quite like stifling, just to like honor those emotions and to be able to access them and speak and talk about how they make us feel, like for example where they are in the body. That's always a really good place to start. It's like, where do you feel that emotion? So I'm feeling guilt. Okay, where is that in my belly? And then I ask like qualities. Is there a color? Is there a texture? Sometimes we give it a name to help people kind of like separate the emotion from their thoughts. And then we go down the road of where does that arrive? Where was the root of that emotion? And very often it's a childhood memory, and we do like inner child work, shadow work around that.
Thank you. That's very clear. Very clear. So I guess to go from there is, we've moved into childhood. In your work, obviously trauma is there. How do we process it? And, understanding trauma in the body. We spoke before we press play, press record. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. So I'd love you to speak a little bit about that, what you understand about trauma in the body. And, obviously there's a bigger overarching of global trauma as well, which I'm fascinated by at the moment. How our leaders and how the history is connected in with things which have happened for hundreds of years. So, yeah, I'd love you to speak a bit about that.
Well, the first thing that came to me was ancestral trauma, and for many, that's quite like a out there concept, maybe acknowledging that it's not just myself who's been traumatized or my caregivers, my parents, for example, but it goes all the way back through our lineage. And as a result of doing this work and being very like disciplined in how I look at myself, so I have like a three pillar approach: self-inquiry, self-care, and self-love. And self-inquiry is always really important. That's how I begin my work. I ask brothers, for example, do you journal? How often do you sit down and just like empty all your thoughts onto the page? And I would do that every day without doubt. And it really helped like start to formalize where my trauma was based and why I was angry, why I felt grief, for example, things of that nature. And having done that and really been like, yeah, very disciplined, like I say, I started to realize that, damn, like this isn't my anger, this isn't my pain and suffering that I've been carrying. It goes all the way back through my lineage. And the gateway, the way to access that was to look at my father and my father's behavior when I was growing up. Right. So I had this big aha moment where I remembered this moment when my dad hit me. So I grew up with quite a Victorian father, a lot of corporal punishment, a lot of like fear, actually, fear-based parenting. And I remember once he hit me, I must have been about 6 or so years old, living in Bangladesh. And I was so livid. And I remember walking into my room, slamming the door behind me, just shouting, I hate you. And that word hate was imprinted on my body. And I didn't know it at the time, but looking back through that memory, I realized it left a mark on me. And just like that book, The Body Keeps the Score, I've been carrying that hate for so long. And it would show up in many different ways, more passive aggressive than aggressive. Although I did go through a stage in my mid-teens to like early 20s, mid-20s, where I was like boozing quite a lot, like self-medicating. And that's where this aggressive, angry streak would come out. I'd be in fights a lot, been to A&E a bunch of times, have like 17 stitches in my head from a gang beating. And I would like play out all this aggression and feeling like insignificant maybe or misunderstood, the injustice of the world. And so I would like constantly push people's buttons when I was trying to get a rise out of them to feel. And it made me very like kind of what I'd call like bipolar or like split personality. People wouldn't even recognize me after I'd get past a certain drink limit. It was like 3 4 pints and suddenly like my eyes went black and they just didn't know who I was anymore. And I got given this alter ego name Pedro instead of Peter. And when Pedro would come out, my friends would know to kind of take a step back and just let it play out. And I'd be getting kicked out of clubs. A bouncer spat on me once. I got in loads of trouble. Like I said, I've been to A&E, I've been arrested, a bunch of things because I was traumatized and I was carrying that trauma and dealing with it in an unhealthy, immature way. But that's all I knew. Had I had these tools that we're discussing, it would have been a very different story. And that's part of my gift now. My medicine is to offer these to young men who feel like that, who are misunderstood and are seeking some meaning in the world.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that resonates with me. My father was similar, kind of Victorian on one level, military, and his anger, very angry man. And I used to run away. And I was only 4, 5, 6, 7. I'd run out the front door, and he'd always find me, which was, quite upsetting on one level that I couldn't get away. But yeah, I was such an angry little boy, and so I can really resonate with that. And I think I carried that into boarding school myself. That was my defense, that you just stay the fuck away from me, and it worked. I kept people away. But like you said, yeah, that trauma. So yeah.
And it makes me think, because I too have got the boarding school story, shall we call it, where I was 9 years old and got sent away. My dad was a civil engineer, so would work in, I don't like to say the developing world, but he would work in different countries, and Bangladesh happens to be where he was based for a lot of it. And so, as opposed to getting educated there, it got to a point where they decided to send me to boarding school. And I went to one in Glastonbury, Millfield in Somerset, and got a bursary for sports and academics. So got some money off, and I was 9. I was 9 years old when I got sent away, which is a very, very young age to be separated from my caregivers, particularly my mum. I think it affected my mum a lot. I remember she cried quite often when I was leaving her. And, not at the time, I guess I didn't put 2 and 2 together, but I definitely felt abandoned. Now, when I look back on it, like there was that sense of like, oh, okay, like I've got to look out for myself, be self-sufficient.
I think I've lost you for a second, Peter. So yeah,
we both said so.
I was just asking about boarding school before we got cut off. Abandonment. You mentioned self-sufficiency.
Yeah, so being 9 years old, left to kind of fend for myself. I don't want to paint a picture of being a victim. That's very much not the case. But I think at such an early age, it is quite traumatic to be, for example, left in a room with boys that I didn't know. And I went on to say that actually fagging was still popular. And for those who don't know, fagging is when like the older boys, the senior boys in school, in boarding school, would kind of exert their authority, their power on the younger kids. And that would show up in different ways. For example, the younger kids would have to sit at the front of the bus. The older boys would be at the back. And when they got on, they'd drop all their bags on our laps. And we'd have to hold them for the whole ride. And we also had like an older like monitor in our rooms, in our dorms. And if we were talking after the lights out, they'd make us stand on the cupboards with our arms out, putting pillows or books. And anytime our arms would drop, they'd hit us. And I was just talking to my housemate, Tiamat, about this, and she was like, that's kind of strange because I was kind of justifying it in a way. It was like, well, at the time, it was like a respect thing that I could take this on, not complain, and still like have fun with them and still see these like older boys, men, as like friends or people to like look up to, role models. And when it eventually got to our time, like as the seniors, when we were in year 8, so about 13, 14, the younger generation just wouldn't do it. They wouldn't cut it. They would like complain to teachers or tell their parents. And so we were the last generation to have this happen to us, and we weren't allowed to like basically inflict it on anyone else. And I think we felt a little bit like upset, a little bit disappointed that we couldn't do what was done to us. It felt like it was a rite of passage, but ultimately that's not the type of rite of passage I want for my young men to go through, right? So yeah, I definitely learned a lot in that period, and still have elements of that come through actually with the work I do, which I can talk about a little bit later.
Yeah. So what for you was the impact of that? How did you survive or cope with that, being, like you said, abandoned, becoming self-sufficient? How did you cope with that?
The theme's always been brotherhood in my life, actually, Pierce. Like I just banded together with like my group of outlaws in some ways. It's how it's always felt. Like I would surround myself with people I could trust. Growing up, I was quite shy and a little bit, just I like not very open to strangers. So I would always have like my boys, these friends who we could kind of create a little like shield protection around me, and that's how like I would communicate with them and would like tell them like ultimately, I'm feeling a little bit upset by this person, older boy or whatever it might be, and we confide in each other. And then I found that the older we got, the more strong and like self-sufficient and like part of a collective. However, like the emotional vulnerability just wasn't there. That kind of gets I guess like rubbed out or ironed out of young men, particularly in boarding schools where like competition is king, being like good at sports and academics, and ultimately kind of being quite stoic. And I don't like to like, I don't want to use the word shit on, but like I don't like to be divisive. Like when it comes to stoicism, I think there's loads of real like beautiful aspects to that. But the idea of like just like take it all on and be strong in like that kind of strong silent type just didn't really support my growth. I was super sensitive and would end up having to like hold it all in, or felt like I couldn't share it, and that then manifested, and like we spoke about before, body keeps the score. Eventually, like I just was like, yeah, it just weighed me down, and I wasn't able to continue.
Thank you, Peter. So how did you? So I'm hearing the arc of you repressed your emotions at school, then as a teen in the 20s, that anger. How did you heal? How did what happened that you became the man you are now?
Many things, many things. I think for me, I've always been an explorer. I've always been an adventurer. Outer world. So I travel a lot, and I got the opportunity after university to do an internship in New York. So kind of went off in my early 20s and started to kind of find myself again, and like not recreate, but it was more like excavate all these like layers of defenses I put up to protect myself. And eventually the opportunity came up to go to the Amazon, and I lived with a tribe, the Shipibo, for a few weeks, and partook in their traditions. Whether that was like living in a maloka, like going to the river, fishing, um, like yeah, not hunting so much, but like more like gathering with the women of the village, and yeah, the plant medicine. So ayahuasca was a big part of that, like figuring out ultimately what I've been like pushing down for so long, and really like coming back to the heart, coming back to truth, and being able to express myself. But I would say the biggest thing is Vipassana for me, doing silent meditation. So I've sat three or so courses, and I've also served three or so courses, and that really like cleared out a lot of the junk, a lot of the things I was telling myself, these old belief structures. And suddenly it was like, oh, like my body is the wisest tool that I have. And the more I can like drop into my body, the more I can be present, the more I can just like, yeah, speak authentically and be received as that. And as a result, like joy is now my like operating system. I very rarely get like super down in the dumps, and when I do, like I honor it, and I'll sit with it and journal and work through it, and have my bros and my sisters to help support through that.
Thank you. What were some of your lessons from your journeys to the Amazon, your ayahuasca? What did you kind of bring back with that?
A big part of what I learned was about my role on this planet. And I've now got more words for it. At the time, I was quite young and like a bit green, a bit naive, maybe. And I felt, oh, well, this is great. I'm seeing all these beautiful images and I'm feeling all this love. However, like the more I've integrated it, I've realized that as a steward of this land, as someone who has been born into a bloodline, my heritage is very deep. It goes back to Africa, to South America, to Scandinavia, Irish, Celtic, etc. That like I have these genes, these codes, which are of like steeped in tradition, and the more I can like draw from that, whether it's like the songs, for example, I'm learning quite a few songs in these native languages, whether it's like working with the land through different traditions. Sweat Lodge, for example, is one of those traditions that are all over the world, in Ethiopia as well. The more I'm like, oh, I see, like this whole experience is to be human, it's to feel the suffering, to give birth, like to give birth, you have to die to some extent. Not speaking for women, but it's a painful labor of love, right? And so part of human expression is to suffer, is to really like honor the pain of living. And so yeah, that was the message. It's like, yeah, be of the land, be here as a steward, a sovereign, a king who can provide and can bless and serve his kingdom. And so I've done that through the work I do, through my life choices, the connections I'm cultivating, building a community as well, with the vision, with the intention to eventually have a piece of land and really give back in a good way, whether it's growing my own food, living in harmony with nature cycles, etc.
Thank you. Sounds like a beautiful vision.
See, one day.
So I'd love you to speak a little bit about community, about the importance of community. I feel what I've seen traveling in Africa or living in Africa when I was in my 20s, this sense of real community. We have this less, and certainly over the last few years, it's become even more disparate. I'd love you to speak of the importance that you've seen through men's work with the Sons of Zion, Sacred Sons, the importance of community and how we can cultivate this.
Yeah, well, for me, community is all about building trust, right? And trust comes through going through the thick and thin with our fellow brothers and sisters. And so a big part of that is being vulnerable, speaking to things that are very hard to express, sharing our secrets or our woes, our stresses, our worries with others, being witnessed in that, being processed as well, like doing like deep work, whether it's inner child work, shadow work, to some of this trauma, emotional release therapy, things of that nature. And seeing people for all their glory, the whole full spectrum of humanity. And through that connection, through the confrontation aspect of like facing our demons, comes like the celebration. And that for me is like one of the most important pillars of community. It's being able to come together, celebrate one another, see each other for all our beauty, and like festivals. That's one thing that I'm certain I know to be true, that like my ancestors, the ancestors would come together, villages, tribes, and celebrate. And that would come during times of harvest. It'd be in unison or at the same time as like the cycles, the seasons. And I think the final point that I find really important about community, I was thinking about this the other day, was the idea that so many of us feel disconnected, right? And it's a lot of the time it's through technology or our separation from nature, feeling like we might be the only ones who feel this way, or feeling like the comparison, like constantly like reevaluating myself in the reflection of another. And actually community is about like kind of bringing down all those walls, bringing down, like leveling the playing field in some ways. And one of my brothers who I met through Sacred Sons, Mike, was telling me he spends a lot of time with the San people, the Bushmen of South Africa, and they have a very equal society. Their community is built on kind of taking the piss out of one another. And I was laughing about that because that's how that's brotherhood to me. It's like being able to like josh and joke and poke one another and have fun, but ultimately to like eradicate the ego in some ways. He was saying that Bushmen, when someone's really good at something, for example, hunting, they don't tend to be the ones who go out and hunt. They actually give space for others because they have a very complex system around how they share meat. So if you're the one who hunted and caught the catch of the day, you actually get a smaller portion than the rest of the people in the tribe. You have to give it away. And so it gives space for others to shine, to sharpen their skills. And that's a similar thing that we do with Sacred Sons and Sons of Zion. It's like bringing together the diaspora, all these separate men and women eventually, but all these people who feel disconnected from their ancestry, bringing back these codes, this ancient future, and being able to sharpen one another, whether that's in the boxing ring, whether that's in these circles, the councils we hold, processing one another. But it's about like bringing down the masks and just being real.
Thank you. It made me think of something when you're saying about ancestry. Have you seen the film Wisdom of Trauma with Gabor Mate in it? Yeah, it's fascinating. And it's kind of based on the idea of the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. And they link in a bit of what we're talking about, the ancestral trauma. I won't go into detail now. I thought you might have seen it, but as you're speaking, it's like, yes, yeah. The other thing there is about nature, with that separation. So anything you found in your practices that really helps men and women reconnect with nature and, you know, that the mother really.
Well, I was laughing about this the other day because, even though I didn't grow up for a lot of my life in London, I was born here. And I remember, like, when I was younger, going into like nature, like even going into a field or a forest and like being like, oh, like itching all over and feeling like real like resistance to being there because I was such a city slicker, right? And I realized the older I got, it's like actually like really like invites in that discomfort in some ways. So I every day more or less walk barefoot on the ground, particularly here in London where there's limited wilderness, like to find a park or somewhere just to get my feet on the ground, to earth, to ground in, spend as much time as I can, like in cold water, for example, whether that's just like a cold shower in the morning, like coming back to that discomfort again. Because like nature is that, it's like it's survival of the fittest. It's like constantly like evolving and fighting and growing, and with growth comes pain, right? Growing pain. So yeah, bringing that in, and I definitely am a big believer in like primal expression, and that for me is like the most animal, the most raw way that I can tap into that, my nature, my human nature. And that could be like crawling. I do a lot of like animal flow exercises in my facilitation, sounding, whether that's growling or howling or chirping like a bird, whatever animal resonates with you. And then we do this thing called primal recalibration with sacred sons, which is a beautiful way in a circle, in a container, to be witnessed in that, inviting any emotions that are present to come through, whether that's grief, to anger, to rage, and like sounding it out without words, without like any performance or trying to prove anything, just like really authentic, and have someone step and witness you opposite to hold that space. And then you express through whatever form, movement, sound, and then you go back into the container, and then the person calls someone else in. And it's this beautiful way to kind of have us all be witnessed in our primal, in our raw, which gives it like a je ne sais quoi, a certain quality that I can't put my finger on.
So what I'm hearing there is like this witnessing, and kind of almost links in with community, is we obviously almost need to be seen and held as men and women. And I judge that often that doesn't happen. We're not held, one, by our parents, because they weren't held before that, because of that ancestral trauma. And how we rectify that is by doing it now. Being present, holding space for witnessing.
Exactly. Yeah, a big thing came through, and I'll be interested to get your take on this, Pierce. It's like I feel like we're all mirrors for one another. And at different times, right? At different times, different mirrors will come through. And sometimes the mirror is a bit murkier, it's a bit more smudged, and we had to clean it. But like that comes through in being triggered. So I know this famous quote from Ram Dass. It's like, you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your parents. And I was sharing with you, I spend quite a lot of time with family. I'm a big family man. And I found the more I've done this work, the more calm and I just like a greater like influence on my family. I don't get triggered. I'm a lot more patient. My parents are getting older, and they're starting to like, just be a bit more stubborn than they used to be. And so being able to kind of sit with that and recognize that they're mirrors for me, that was a big message that came through with the ayahuasca, actually, was that, I'm just a reminder of others like divine nature. And so the more I can be authentic, the more I can remind people of how they are, how they're built.
Thank you. Yeah, mirrors.
Do you feel like a mirror?
Definitely. I think I lived in a community. I lived in a Buddhist community monastery for a number of years, and it was a nightmare on one level because of these mirrors. It was like, that guy's really angry. And then the abbot would say, well, could it be anything within you? But no, it's him. And then gradually it was like, oh shit. And then that was through the work with dreams that I started to see I was dreaming about these really angry characters and then these nightmares. And it was like, and then I realized, oh my God, that's me. I was self-harming. I was doing all of this stuff, but I was saying, well, it's them. So I totally agree. The mirrors, it was such a powerful thing. I was being triggered all the time because I was just so unconscious, so traumatized that as I started to grieve and let go of the stuff. And with my wife, I've noticed the triggers, but also the shining, being the mirror that, wow, this amazing woman actually going, that's also a mirror. And that's useful because I think as someone who's been, for me, has been through a lot of trauma, my default was I'm not good enough, or I'm a failure, I'm a shit. That was what I taught myself from a young age. So to actually have the opposite side, the shining, that's brought so many tears and such grief. It's like, I'm not as bad as I've always told myself to be that, you know, and that's been helpful. So yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, beautifully put. It's very much that, right? It's like so many of us are more tuned in to like self-criticism. The ego can be quite a harsh taskmaster, right? And ultimately, it is difficult to see our beauty, to see our treasures. And sometimes it does take others to remind us of how wonderful, how glorious this vessel is. And I tend to talk a lot about the kind of drama triangle, right? People being stuck in the victim mentality, and how to transcend that is to rewrite our own story, to be the victor, and to start to like create or challenge, or even what was the third part of the empowerment triangle? To create, challenge, and to question, to coach ourselves or others back to that realization, to then step into the third stage, which is the vessel, and to acknowledge that really we're just channeling, that the more I can clear this channel, eat, live healthy, breathe, and just be, the more I get out of my own way, the more it doesn't have to be about win or lose. It's just about show up. And that feels good. And I can imagine being in a relationship, there's a lot of showing up, right, with your wife and so on.
Yeah. She's incredible and so patient, and I'd had such a shut down heart, and learning to trust, as you mentioned, community about trust. I've learned to trust her, and therefore to let my defenses down that I built up. So it's been an incredible journey. So we're kind of coming towards the end of today. I really enjoyed speaking to you. Such beautiful heart, wisdom. Is there anything you would love to share? I mean, some of the other topics I wanted to touch on a bit was men's mental health, suicide, self-harm, are some of the things you mentioned in your last in the podcast I listened to. Is there anything you would say? Because I'm hearing this a lot about mental health, suicide. Is there anything you can share?
Well, what's really present for me is the role of men's mental health for melanated brothers, men of African descent. I mentioned the diaspora and how disconnected many of us feel, particularly those who, for example, are pigmented like myself and don't necessarily know, what part of Africa they originated from. And so the work that we're doing with Sons of Zion is really like focusing on Black men's mental health. And, you mentioned suicide, that's rife in men of all colours. Particularly here in London, the options for young men are quite limited who have similar backgrounds, right? Whether that's like to a life of crime, which is so prevalent in inner cities, gang violence, things like that. And so I feel like now it's really important to focus, to offer this work to those men who might not have access to it, or who haven't even got an inkling, haven't got any men or sisters in their lives to show them, kind of to model what it is to be a mature, healthy masculine. So yeah, that's really kind of the banner that I'm waving at the moment.
And what is that work? Is it that you go, on a Friday, Saturday night, meeting these young men, or do they find out about you through community groups? What's the...
Yeah, it's multi-layered. So we do have brothers who are like community-based, who are already working with young people and have like the ability to invite them in. We do online councils as well for bros who might not be able to get to the physical spaces, which are regular. All of this is on sonsofzion.uk website. And we also have our warrior activations. And I think particularly in this day and age, again, to reframe what it is to be a warrior. So like I mentioned, like gang violence is so prevalent, young, angry Black men being labeled with that. And the reality of anger is that this is a healthy expression of our warrior when channeled into setting boundaries. A lot of anger, a lot of rage goes unchecked, and so it ends up spilling out sideways, and it turns into violence, it turns into assault, things like that. So with the warrior activations that we're doing all across the UK, the next one's in London on the 25th of this month. It's about figuring out where are you not showing up? Where are you not boundary in your life? How can we start to build solid foundations to be able to state your no's, to own your no's? If you're being coerced by someone, maybe someone's overstepping their mark, maybe they're making you feel small purposely. It could be work related, it could be in relationships. It's just about men being able to communicate clearly how they're feeling. And like I say, the longest journey can be from the head to the heart. But once we're in our hearts and we can express our truth, the truth, the more people start to get hip to that. And it's okay, I'm not going to take the piss or abuse, manipulate this person.
Thank you. Sounds really beautiful work. So 25th of March down in London.
Yeah.
Sounds great. I'll put a link to the Sons of Zion. Did you say .co.uk?
It's just .uk, sonsofzion.uk.
Okay, yeah. So I'll put a link in the bottom there.
Yeah. And for those who aren't melanated, just because I don't want to feel like I'm not representing, I mean, I do have Celtic blood, Scandinavian blood as well, but we do Sacred Sons are doing immersions. So these are our 2-day events in cities around Europe. So we have a bunch of those dates coming up, one in Dublin actually on the I've got a feeling it's on the 29th of April to the 30th. And we also have a big EMX, the Embodied Masculine Experience, I said, back in Devon in July of this year. So for those who are interested to get more, just downloads, more uploads, more codes, more expression, more embodiment, come and join us in July in Devon.
Okay, I'll put a link to Sons of Zion, to Sacred Sons, and to your website, Men's Work Coach, as well. So
mensworkcoach.com.
Out to Peter. Well, thank you so much for your time. Brother. A real blessing for the work you're doing. Thank you. Big thanks to Michael for connecting us.
Yeah, big up, Michael, and thank you, Piers. It's been a lovely conversation, and I definitely love to continue connecting with you. I feel real kindred spirit, with our background, boarding school, to the work we're doing, and I see, brothers who have these solid partnerships as something that I'm working towards. I mean, this is a whole nother conversation, but just around sacred union and calling in that feminine to match my masculine is really it's really key in my path, my life's path on this planet.
Blessing with that, brother. Okay,
all right, brother. See. Peace.